Hi, this is Erica Norton, and I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. I'm very excited to have with us today Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee. She owns a family and real estate law firm out in the Worcester area, and she and her team are fantastic at what they do. And we're very fortunate to have her with us today. We're going to be talking about conservatorships and estate planning. And if you have any elderly family members, you may really want to listen in and take some notes. Welcome to the show today, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
So this is it's an exciting topic. I mean, you don't think about it till you need it though, right? I mean, a lot of people don't plan.
A lot of people don't plan, and the problem with not planning is one, it's going to cost a lot of money, and two, it's an unknown. Like, who are you going to get?
Mm.
Maybe it's a family member you don't want. Maybe none of the family members can work together and act like adults. I mean, you really run the risk of, if you're not the one planning it, somebody else is going to make that decision for you, and it may not be the decision you want.
Mm. And that's never good. Because I mean, because a lot of people have situations where as we get older, we do lose some of our short-term memory. Some of us lose a lot more than that. But it happens gradually and you almost don't realize it. Other people will start questioning you and then you think they're crazy, right? I mean, am I right? Do you see this happen a lot?
I see it happen on a regular basis. I mean, I just had a client today that says, "Hey, did did we send that out to them?" And I'm like, yeah, and I had the conversation with you about it. So it could be something just like that. And sometimes it's just, oh my God, life gets too busy. And that was like, 25 days ago. So why would I remember that? But sometimes it's in real time where I had a conversation with my client yesterday and we're in court today and they're not remembering things. And that's very scary because if you don't have that planning, again, you don't know where you're actually going to have, when you're going to have an issue in and how, to what extreme, I guess.
So there are several things that you need to do to start planning. And we've definitely talked about this before, but today are we mostly concentrating on elderly clients and people who have elderly parents who might be going through this and may not be prepared documents wise?
I, I think it's I think it's really for everybody, any adult. But obviously, the older you are, the more this should be hyper focused on you. The reality is, as we get older, chances are you're going to need it. But also, if you're 18 years old, guess what? Something can happen to you. The only good thing is when you're 18, you probably don't have a spouse and it's probably going to revert to your parents, which is great as long as you like them.
I mean, that's definitely true. You and I were just talking about a friend in common that we just lost at 58. And luckily, she was an attorney. She probably did have everything buttoned down and she was very good at what she did. Uh, but nobody expects to die at 58. And so there might be people out there that are less versed in this situation that don't really, some people even believe that once they make plans, a will or something like that, that just opens up the universe to taking them away.
They do. And I always walk out the door and go, so now that you have the estate plan, you're going to live forever. So I guess it's all perspective. Um, you know, you don't know what's going to happen when it's going to happen. But my whole thing is plan and review it because some things change and you need to make sure that you're updating stuff.
Right, right. So let's talk about what the documents are that you recommend that everyone who's alive should have just to help plan.
Well, it starts with the three basics, and they're always going to be the basics. You're going to have your will, and again, most people will go, "Well, I don't have anything." Okay, great, but you got to have something. You at least have a bank account. Chances are the bank account's only in your name, so that one thing alone is going to force somebody to have to probate your estate without a will. So again, if you have a bank account, if you have a car, you have enough to do a will. So that's number one. Number two is going to have a healthcare proxy. have a healthcare proxy that's going to be able to take care of any medical issues if and when it arises. You don't know when you're going to get in a car accident. You don't know when you're going to need somebody else to intervene because somebody T-boned you. So you really want to make sure that you have somebody that you trust to make those decisions when you can't. And the third one is a durable power of attorney. And that's going to be able to make financial decisions or pay your bills if and when you're in the hospital. Again, we all think that we're invincible, but the reality is sometimes hospital stays are months long. And if you can't make those commitments, whether it be financial or or medical wise, you're running the risk of us having to go into court to address those issues.
And really, like, when that happens, whoever it is that has to go in to court and try to address those issues, I mean, you might be out of it. You may not be able to make any kind of decision. You may have somehow lost that ability. And young or old, so you could get hit by a car, like you said, and who knows what kind of injuries you would sustain. So now people have to go in and try to figure out where your bank accounts are. Do you even have these documents? I mean, it's a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of time for your family.
It is. And again, the reality is it's also time consuming because not only are you paying an attorney to go in and to obtain a guardianship or obtain a conservatorship, but then what if there's a family member who disagrees? Great. Now we have to figure out which one's the better one. And now there's two petitioners or three petitioners, or they're all objecting to the petition. So you run that risk where if you had made the directive in a written format, at least we had something to back it up. We have a preliminary document today that we can look at. And if we need something further or more in depth, we'll address it then.
That's so complicated. And it's true because when money's involved and people assume that you're trying to do that for, trying to take over somebody's bank accounts, or maybe you're going to sell their house and keep the money for yourself. I mean, who knows? Maybe some people are trying to do that, but for the most part, you need whatever that person has in order to pay for their care, because care is not cheap. It could be five, six, $7,000 a month if you're doing some sort of assisted living or memory care type of a facility. And again, that could go for somebody of any age. So if you sell someone's house, hopefully they've got some equity, that'll help them for a few years. Um, that it's true. Like, people could start fighting over that, just like they fight over a will after somebody passes away. And what do you see typically happen in those cases? Is it a very long process?
Again, it all depends on if you have directives in place. If you have a written directive, it's more likely that it will go smooth. There might be some contests going on, but at the end of the day, they're going to go, well, let's just keep moving it along. Yes, this person has authority, and certainly if you're, obviously, if we're talking about the healthcare proxy or durable power of attorney, you're alive. You're going to be able to vote, if you will, and give your opinion. The problem is you're not necessarily competent or fully capacitated to make those decisions, but we're at least going to get your thoughts on it. Obviously, if you passed away, then we're only looking at this document. So the good thing is even somebody that's having capacity issues can still voice their opinion, but without it, it's a free for all. And it's really who wants to go in and file and who wants to hire the attorney. And sometimes it's okay, we're never going to agree and we have to appoint somebody by the court.
So what is your advice? Like, what first of all, what's the order that you should go in to try to handle these situations? Obviously, you're going to want to, first of all, know which documents you need. What kind of care do you need? I mean, I've even heard that you can get social workers involved that, can help assess the situation. I don't know if you'd even suggest that, but I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it depends on what assets you have. So now we really are talking about your age and what growth you have financially. The more assets you have, the better off we want to protect them, because we'd love to be able to put those in an irrevocable trust and not have Medicare touch them. So that might be a great option. But again, you have to plan, because unfortunately, there's a 5-year look back. So it really depends on what assets do you have, how do we best protect them, and ultimately, what is it that you want? I mean, some people are like, nope, I don't care if my family doesn't get a penny. You put me in the best nursing home. This is the facility that I'm going into. And they want everything pre-done. So again, it really depends on the person and what they want. And there's other people that are like, no, nobody's going to get a penny of my money. So again, really depends on what your goal is. But we have a sit down, we go through all of that. We talk about, again, where you are. Maybe you do have a medical condition and you're talking about DNR. Is that something you really want? Because a lot of times people will tell me that. I'm like, but wait a minute. You don't have any medical conditions right now. No. Well, why would we want to sign a DNR now? That's for somebody that's actually at end of life, whether it be age or, cancer related, something of that nature that really is going to focus on, I'm done. I lived a good life. Like, you have to realize that, because once we sign it, it's not a going back. So we really have to think about what we're going to execute, how we're going to execute. And, you always want to have a backup person, because unfortunately, maybe something happens to that same person, especially if it's your spouse. You're in the same car accident. You're in the same plane crash, things of that nature. Like, you're going to have to worry about that. And all too often, you'll have younger parents and they always want to take separate flights. And that's the reason why. So you really want to make sure that those ideas are thought about. And if this scenario happens, then what's the other option? And again, I'll go through, unfortunately, killing 20 people off just so we can get to what you really want.
And you do. You killed everybody off that I knew when we put together my will. I'm like, well, I don't want that person to die. I guess I got to figure out who would get my daughter then. I mean, that is a super scary situation to think about. But it can definitely happen. So another scenario that we can talk about is that, a lot of people that are elderly and they're starting to show signs. I mean, I've done a lot of research lately. I mean, it's like people start to get very frail. And so let's say you have someone that is a fall risk and they are really hurting themselves all the time. Maybe they're not making the best decisions. Sometimes I know somebody else whose mom, um, the bank called her because her name was also on the account, and she was spending all this money and bouncing all these checks, and she couldn't keep her finances together. And I know someone else, I actually saw it at the bank the other day. This gentleman comes in and he's like, I don't have any ID, but I want my money out of the account. And they're like, well, if you don't have a bank card and you don't have your ID, then I'm sorry, we can't give it. He's like, this is ridiculous. I've had this account for 7 years. And like, this is all happening in the bank. And he had somebody with him that was obviously a caretaker, but she wasn't getting involved. And he was just it was all the bank's fault. I might take my business somewhere else because you won't give me my money that no ID, no card. So, I mean, and sometimes the bank won't even give you a card anymore if you keep losing it and people steal it. And then, all of a sudden you've got all these weird charges on your account all the time. And I mean, there's a lot of scary stuff. So you have someone like that that's obviously in need of help, but they're never going to relinquish it. They don't want to stop driving. They don't want to stop doing anything that they ever used to do. And you're crazy if you think that they're losing their mind. So what do you do in that situation?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think it depends on who you are in that scenario. You know, Ideally, you can hopefully talk them off the ledge and say, you really need to get this stuff done. And it may be too late to draft up the will, depending on their competency level. But the good thing with the healthcare proxy or durable power of attorney, the your attention and your competency is less than it would be in a will. So you might be able to facilitate those documents. Of course, that's assuming the person is willing to do it. If they're not willing to do it, then yeah, guess what? You're going to end up going into court and you're going to need to obtain a medical certificate saying this person is incompetent. And that's probably the hardest thing to do in Massachusetts because I don't know who the doctor is, or she refuses to go to the doctor. How do I get her to go to the doctor? Okay, well, let's pray and we get this right around the time that she is going for her annual or something, or maybe she needs testing. But it's difficult when you can't get a medical certificate because in a conservatorship or guardianship, you need to have that medical certificate to say they are incompetent, or we're just going to rely on, your word, and that's not going to be good enough.
Well, I mean, it's a scary situation. I mean, what is the scariest thing about it is that I also know somebody else, a very elderly aunt of mine who lived 5.5 hours away from anyone. She didn't have any kids, and she was driving a giant Cadillac Escalade her whole life. Still driving it around at like 92, and she ran over somebody's dog in her neighborhood, and they basically reported her, and they had to, like, the police had to call around until they could finally find any kind of relative, and everyone lived over 5 hours away. So two of my cousins had to take over a conservatorship, and they had to sell the house, and they had to find a memory care facility. And her boyfriend at the time, who was probably a couple years younger than her, drove to the facility and tried to bust her out once she started. I mean, it was crazy. Some of this stuff gets really crazy.
Absolutely. And I think, that's the stuff that's frustrating, but it is good when you do have family members that are driving because then you can always tip line them, if you will, to the RMV or to somebody that says, "Hey, we really need to do an exam," or, that type of stuff. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, when you get a certain age, you should have to take another driving test. Um, I wish they would make that a rule. That's one of my, pet peeves because they do become bad drivers. They forget everything that they've been taught, or they're the ones causing the accidents because they can't see over the steering wheel. It's a real thing. As a small person, guess what? I can understand that when I get in a different car and go, "Ooh, I feel tall today." So we all know what that experience feels like, but the reality is sometimes that person is just too close and they're like, "That's not me. I'm not that person. I'm not old like that." And you'll get that pushback. And so you do have to go to the resources of the state and say, this person really shouldn't be driving. But that's what you can do on the road. The question is, again, what do you do when you have the bank accounts or they're not going to the doctors? And that really becomes the problem of how do I get them to do this?
I mean, it's true. I think a driver's test, and I think a vision test, and maybe a hearing test. Because, I mean, I know someone that's been making very long trips over many states, and they should have gotten their eyes checked several years ago. And I'm not in charge of that person, so like you can't do anything. It's hard, but yeah, and it does come to that eventually. You do the tip line, they get called in, and they've got to prove that they can drive and that they can see. And if they can't, then their license gets suspended, and then they're in a lurch. They've got to figure out like what they can do to really start changing their life to the way it probably should be at that particular stage with their health the way it is.
Absolutely. And the problem is, you have other people that just have some type of dementia or Alzheimer's and they're driving. Great, except they have no idea where they're going. So maybe they are a great driver, but if they don't recall where they're going, that becomes a problem too. So again, using the resources are great, and sometimes they just don't work because again, we haven't gotten all of our acts together and really figured out a way to go, what is it that we need to make sure that elderly people that are having these mental health issues, what protections do we have for them? And we don't have that.
I mean, there are definitely some organizations out there that can advise on what to do. Um, I guess you can hire your own social worker to go in, and they look through all the bills, they get the medical appointments in order, they figure things out. They can also help with making sure that they have the right documentation as far as wills and powers of attorneys, that sort of thing. But again, it's another thing that the person has to agree to, that you can't make them go to that meeting. It's it's definitely, it's so difficult, and you hope that you'd have a mature individual that is willing to plan this and isn't superstitious about putting anything together. But really, you hear so many horror stories about when people die without those plans, and even hurt other people because they won't take the steps that they need to retire properly, and don't drive at night, and don't drive in the rain, and all the things that would cause them to have an accident. They don't care.
Yeah, and I would say, realistically, if you can get, best way to try to do this is when you see somebody deteriorating is, maybe you offer them to go, oh, look, I'll have a personal aide come to your house. Maybe they just help you clean, clean the house. Wasn't that great? Oh, and they'll help you with your finances and just, you just need to sign them and, you can still look at everything and they'll take care of it. But again, helping you organize. And sometimes people will go, oh, great. And if you have, a family member that's willing to put up the money for that and they're not even paying for it, sometimes they're more amenable to that. So it is an avenue that you might have to go down and it might work for you. But at some point, it becomes even too tedious for that. Sometimes it just needs, you need an assisted living facility. You need to go somewhere else and it needs to be 24/7 care. So really, again, plan ahead, have these conversations, do your due diligence with everybody on a regular basis and make sure things are updated.
And don't be afraid to call Nicole and her team if you need further advice, if you really do feel like you need to go in for that conservatorship, because let's face it, some people are just not going to let go. They're very stubborn, and you have to be able to go in there and prove and have examples and solid proof of what you're saying, because they're going to make sure that the person really is not able to take care of themselves before they give control over to somebody else.
Absolutely. And again, problem is without that planning, it's next to impossible. And the biggest thing is, again, while they are competent, maybe they do change it to somebody and it's somebody that's completely unreasonable. You now run that risk of, well, they had a lucid moment, so then they changed it to Johnny, who is a personal trainer and has no ties, but oh, by the way, I'm writing out checks to him, and they happen to be in large sums of money every month. But don't worry, he's training me. But you don't go to the gym. And you run the risk of those types of scenarios that aren't getting resolved in the legal fashion.
I mean, the wolves could be at the door and you have no idea. And that is really scary.
Absolutely.
So, is there any other advice that we should know right before we go? Because it is a super serious topic, and unfortunately, one of those things that you can't always do anything about. But if you can, I know that you've got the answer.
And I think it just goes back to, plan. We're not invincible as much as we'd like to think we are, and they haven't figured out a way for us to live forever. So plan, review the documents regularly, update them regularly. Hopefully you have a confidant in your corner that will tell you flat out, like, Nicole, you're losing your friggin' mind. You just asked me this, you just told me this, and hopefully you can go, really? And have the sense to make those decisions, get the help that you need, because really that's what it boils down to. But at least if you have the plan in place and the written documentation that helps you, that's one less thing that you're going to have to be stressed about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, this is very helpful, and I'm sure, everyone's got parents. Everyone deals with this at some point in their life. I mean, what do they say that um not the baby boomers, the Gen Xers are experiencing parenthood for their kids and reverse parenthood for their parents. and it's a special time.
That's one word for it.
Well, you have a great weekend, and thank you everyone for watching.